The wind howls through the barren cliff as a woman stands at the edge, ready to end it all. But a stranger, human and seemingly fearless, approaches, offering her a chance to fight back instead of falling into despair. With only hours left, before a corrupt scientist presents stolen research to the galaxy's elites, can they pull off the impossible heist? Betrayal, danger, and an explosive plan collide in a race against time to reclaim what was lost. Will they succeed, or will this be their last chance for justice? Stay tuned. This fight is just beginning. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Alexian Hartwell sat at the edge of the cliff, his legs crossed in front of him as the twin moons of Zyrinthos cast a pale silver light across the land. The harsh winds of the planet whipped around him, tugging at his black combat suit, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he sat still, letting the wind rattle his armor as he lost himself in the view. Below him, the city of Zyrinthos sprawled, its towering structures of glass and steel glinting in the moonlight. The city, built through centuries of human perseverance, stood as a testament to the resilience of mankind. This was where Alexian came when the weight of the world felt too heavy to carry. The cliff, though dangerous and treacherous, offered him a strange sense of peace. It was a place far from the bustling, chaotic life of the outpost, and far from the memories that haunted him. Here he could hear only the howling wind and his own thoughts, the only reminders of the past battles that had shaped him. He had been a soldier for most of his life, fighting in wars that had scarred his body and soul. The Zarin conflict, which had cost humanity so much, was just one of many battles he had fought. But in the quiet of Zyrinthos, away from the noise and chaos, he could almost forget. Almost. The memories of the faces of fallen comrades still lingered in his mind, their voices calling out to him in the dark. He had fought beside them, and many of them had died, leaving him with an emptiness he could never fill. With a deep sigh, Alexian closed his eyes, letting the wind blow through his hair. The feeling of the cold breeze against his face, the rush of air in his lungs, it reminded him that he was still alive. And yet life felt like a weight he could barely hold up anymore. He had seen too much, lost too much. And there were moments like tonight, when he wondered if it was all worth it. As he sat there, meditating in silence, a sound caught his attention. It was faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in the wind, but then it became clearer. Footsteps. Someone was walking toward him. Alexian remained perfectly still, his enhanced hearing picking up the steady rhythm of the footsteps. They were unsteady, as if the person walking was unsure of their footing, or perhaps burdened by something heavier than just the wind. He didn't turn to look. He simply waited, his mind alert. It wasn't unusual for people to come out to the cliff at night. Some came to seek solitude, others for a glimpse of the city below. But something about this person was different. There was an unease in their steps, an unfamiliar energy in the air. His instincts, honed through years of military training, told him that this wasn't just another visitor. The sound of the footsteps grew closer, the quiet sobbing that accompanied them impossible to ignore. Alexian opened his eyes but didn't move. He kept his posture relaxed, his arms resting on his knees as if nothing in the world could disturb the calm that had settled over him. And yet, he felt a strange pull in his chest. Something inside him urged him to look. When he finally did turn, his gaze landed on the figure standing a few paces away, a Nexian female. Her violet skin shimmered in the moonlight, her long black hair whipping around her face as the wind battered her fragile frame. She was dressed in a sleek bodysuit, her form outlined against the backdrop of the city's distant lights. But it wasn't her appearance that caught Alexian's attention. It was the look in her eyes. Her eyes, though bright and luminous, held a deep sadness, a sadness that Alexian had seen in so many before. The pain of loss, of hopelessness, the kind of despair that seemed impossible to escape from. He recognized it instantly. It was the same look he had worn during his darkest days. The look of someone who had lost everything and no longer cared whether they lived or died. She was standing on the edge of the cliff, her back to him. The wind seemed to carry her pain, echoing it in the howling gusts that blew past them. Alexian's heart tightened in his chest. He knew that feeling all too well. The hopelessness. The desire to end it all, to let go of everything. But he also knew that it didn't have to be this way. There was always another way. He had learned that lesson the hard way, through the countless battles, the losses, and the moments when he had thought he could go no further. Without a word, he stood up slowly, his boots crunching against the rocky ground. The Nexian woman froze, her attention snapping to him. Her eyes widened in surprise as she took in his human form. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just stood there studying him, her face a mixture of confusion and anger. "This doesn't concern you, human," she spat, her voice trembling with emotion. Alexian didn't flinch. He simply smiled and took a few steps closer, his boots steady against the cliff's edge. His voice when he spoke was calm and casual, belying the tension he felt. "Maybe not, but I make it a point never to let a beautiful woman cry alone on a cliff. It's bad for my reputation as a gentleman." Her expression faltered, caught somewhere between disbelief and frustration. She stared at him for a long moment, her body trembling in the wind. Then slowly she took a step back from the edge. Alexian didn't say anything more. He didn't need to. His presence, his words had made her pause. As they stood there in the silence, the wind died down, and for the first time in a long while, the Nexian woman seemed to breathe more easily. She looked at him again, this time without the anger. There was something else there now, something softer. "My name's Alexian," he said, his voice gentle, "and I'm really hoping you'll tell me yours." Beautiful crying alien lady is a bit of a mouthful. The corners of her lips quivered, and despite the tears that still streaked down her face, she found herself laughing, just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still hope. The air around them seemed to settle into an unexpected stillness, as if the world itself had paused to listen to their exchange. Alexian stood with his hands in his pockets, his posture relaxed, watching the Nexian woman slowly lower her gaze. The weight of her sorrow hadn't disappeared, but something had shifted within her, something that Alexian could sense, even from a distance. She wasn't as close to the edge as she had been moments ago, but she wasn't yet ready to walk away either. After a long silence, the woman finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, raw from the sobs she had tried to stifle. "You think it's that easy, don't you? You think a few kind words will suddenly make everything better?" Alexian tilted his head slightly, his brown eyes studying her with genuine curiosity. "I never said it would be easy, but I do know that sometimes all it takes is someone willing to listen. And maybe, just maybe, someone who doesn't let you walk away from the cliff." She scoffed, clearly not expecting such a response. Her purple skin glowed softly in the fading light of the twin moons, and her dark hair, still a tangled mess from the wind, framed her face like an artful halo. "I'm not some fragile thing you can fix with a smile, human," she snapped, but there was no venom in her words, just exhaustion. "You don't understand what it's like to lose everything. You've never known what it's like to be discarded, thrown aside by the very people who once believed in you." Alexian's face softened, and he stepped forward just a fraction. He could feel the walls she had built around herself, the anger, the hurt, the desperation, but he also sensed something deeper. "I may not understand your exact pain, but I know loss. I know what it's like to be at the bottom, wondering if there's any point in continuing. I've been there too many times to count." She stiffened at his words, looking at him with skepticism, but there was something in his gaze that made her pause. Alexian didn't push further. He didn't try to force his experiences on her, but he knew that if she was going to open up, it had to be on her terms. "You don't have to tell me everything," he said quietly. "But I think you might feel a little better if you get it off your chest. You don't have to carry that burden alone." For a moment, the wind seemed to pick up again, but the silence between them was thick with the weight of unspoken words. Finally, the Nexian woman dropped her gaze, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Vera." The soft tremor in her voice made Alexian's heart ache, though he tried not to show it. Vera, he repeated gently. That's a beautiful name. She let out a dry laugh, bitter, but laced with something else. It used to be, she said. Once I was someone. I had dreams, plans, things I thought could make a real difference. But now, she trailed off, her eyes distant as if trying to focus on a memory that no longer felt real. Alexian remained silent, letting her speak when she was ready. There was no rush, no pressure. He knew the first step toward healing was often just being heard. Vera turned her eyes back toward the city below, and Alexian noticed a deep sadness in the way she looked at it. It wasn't the awe he'd expected, more like a feeling of defeat. I was one of the brightest minds in the Nexian Science Institute. I had developed a system that could change space travel forever, a way to transfer consciousness across the galaxy without the need for long-distance travel or risking human lives in dangerous space missions. Her voice faltered as she spoke of her work. It was supposed to revolutionize everything. Alexian's expression remained unchanged, but a flicker of interest passed through his gaze. The idea of transferring consciousness was revolutionary, a breakthrough that could eliminate so many dangers of space exploration. He could see why someone like Vera would be proud of such an achievement. What happened? He asked softly, leaning slightly closer but respecting the space she needed. Vera's shoulders tensed and she swallowed hard before speaking again. My work was stolen by someone I trusted. Director Arlen, my supervisor at the Institute, took everything. He erased my name from the research and presented it as his own. The council was too blinded by his credentials to care about the truth. Her words were punctuated by a bitter laugh that lacked humor. Now, Arlen's going to present my work at the Galactic Science Summit tomorrow. He'll be hailed as a visionary while I'm here. Stuck. No one will ever know the truth. No one will remember who I was. And that's why I'm here on this cliff, because it feels like the end. It feels like I don't have anything left to fight for. Alexian's jaw tightened as he listened. He had expected her to be angry, but he hadn't expected the depth of her despair. He knew how it felt to be betrayed, to lose everything to someone who didn't deserve it. But this was something else entirely. Her work, her future, everything she had worked for, had been stolen in the most cruel way possible. He took a deep breath, trying to contain the frustration that was bubbling inside him. But instead of reacting with anger, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He reached out, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. Vera, he said quietly, I can't pretend to know what you're going through, but I know one thing. Your story isn't over. The people who did this to you may have taken your research, but they can't take away who you are. You're still you, and that in itself is something worth fighting for. She looked up at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. For a moment, she said nothing, but the wind seemed to calm around them as if nature itself was waiting for her response. Slowly she reached up, touching his hand with a hesitant gesture, as if unsure whether she could trust the human standing beside her. I don't know if I can fight anymore, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Alexian smiled gently, his voice filled with conviction. You don't have to do it alone, I'm here. And if you'll let me, I'll help you get back what you deserve. The quiet that followed wasn't filled with sadness, but with something else. Something warmer, something that neither of them had expected. Vera took a deep breath, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to hope. Her voice was still shaky, but there was a glimmer of something new in her tone. Maybe it's worth fighting for after all. Alexian nodded, his expression sincere. It's always worth fighting for. Let's get back what's yours. And with that, a fragile but real bond began to form between them. Two people from different worlds, each holding onto the thread of hope in their hearts. The wind had finally died down completely, and the moon's light now bathed the cliff in a serene, almost ethereal glow. It felt like a turning point, not just for Vera, but for Alexian as well. He had expected this moment to be another of many in his life, one of solitude, one of quiet reflection, perhaps even one of regret, but instead it had become something entirely different. Vera, her long violet hair still ruffled from the wind, turned to face him fully. There was a spark in her eyes, something he hadn't seen when she had first approached the edge of the cliff. It was the beginning of something new, something he hoped she would continue to nurture. She blinked as if pulling herself back into the present. "I've been thinking," she said softly, her voice steady now, "about what you said. About fighting. About taking back what's mine." Alexian nodded, his gaze steady. "And?" Her gaze turned away from him for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the cliff. "I had a plan once, I had it all worked out, but then, well, it was stolen from me just like everything else. I thought it was useless now, but I think, just maybe, there's still a way." Alexian didn't interrupt her, his eyes narrowing, slightly in thought. He could see the determination building inside her again. It wasn't the first time he had seen someone so consumed by their own loss, but it was rare to see someone claw their way back from the abyss with such quiet resolve. She turned to face him again, her gaze unwavering. "I know where Arlen's hiding the research. I know the layout of the Institute's secure vaults, the backup servers, everything. I worked there for years. I used to design the security systems. I know how he thinks, and I know how to get past him." Alexian's interest peaked. "You've got the skills, I don't doubt that, but we're talking about going in without backup. No one else knows what we're doing. No one else can help." She let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly as if the weight of her words had started to settle in. "I don't need anyone else. I've spent too long letting others take control of my work. I'm done with that. If we're going to do this, it has to be me, with you." Alexian studied her for a moment. He could see the resolve in her eyes, the same fire he'd seen in himself countless times. It was a familiar look, the look of someone who had nothing left to lose but everything to gain. "I'm in," he said simply. "But we need a plan, and we need to move quickly." Vera nodded, her face suddenly serious. "Arlen's presentation at the summit is tomorrow night. We have less than 24 hours. The Institute's security protocols are sophisticated, but they're predictable. I'll get us inside undetected. Once we're in, it's just a matter of getting to the vault and retrieving my research. I have a feeling Arlen's kept it hidden in a high-security facility, but I can bypass the encryption codes. I've done it before." Alexian's mind was already racing, processing her words. He had never been one to act without a solid plan, but he knew this was different. This wasn't just about stealing data. This was about taking back what had been wrongfully taken from her, and exposing the lies that had been told. This was about making things right. "I'll handle the rest," Alexian said after a beat, his tone resolute. "The distractions, the backup plans. We'll need to create diversions, throw off the Institute's security long enough for you to access the research. And once we have the data, we don't stick around. We get out fast, no hesitation." Vera met his gaze, her eyes dark with a mix of determination and fear. "What if Arlen sees us coming? What if he knows we're coming? For him?" "We make sure he doesn't," Alexian replied, his jaw tightening. "We move like shadows. No one gets a chance to catch us. Not Arlen, not the security guards, and definitely not anyone at the summit." Vera was silent for a moment, her fingers clenching into fists. The weight of their plan was beginning to sink in. She had never done anything like this. Never had, too. The stakes were high, higher than she had ever imagined. But in the presence of this human soldier, there was an odd comfort. Alexian wasn't afraid of failure. If anything, he welcomed it, just as long as they kept moving forward. "I'll need access to the Institute systems," she said, her voice focused. "That means we'll need to get past their firewalls, bypass their mainframe. But first, I need something from you." Alexian raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What is it?" "Security clearance," she said, her voice cold with intent. "I know the codes, but I need you to get me in. You're a human contractor. You'll have access to all the right places." Alexian smirked. "I've never been one to let my clearance go to waste." The night sky was deepening as Alexian and Vera began to outline their plan. Time was quickly running out, but as the hours ticked by, they worked tirelessly to formulate the details. The wind had picked up again, but this time neither of them noticed the cold. They were too busy piecing together every detail, every contingency. Vera's mind was sharp as she explained the layout of the Institute's security. There were 4 main access points, 2 for public use and 2 classified. Only high-ranking. Officials had access to the classified ones, but Vera knew how to get into them. She'd designed them herself. Alexian absorbed her words, understanding the stakes. This wasn't just a heist. This was about exposure, bringing Arlen's corruption to light and restoring Vera's legacy. But the risks were immense. If they were caught, there would be no second chance. "Do you know where the data's being stored?" Alexian asked, his voice low and serious. Vera nodded. "In the vault beneath the main office. Arlen's office. It's heavily secured, but I know the codes to unlock it. We'll need to get there before the summit starts. Once the presentation begins, they'll be too distracted to notice what's happening. But we have to move quickly. Once they realize what's missing, they'll lock everything down. We'll be long gone by then," Alexian said with a grin. "Just make sure you get your research back." As the night wore on, Vera and Alexian knew they had one shot at this. There would be no turning back once they moved forward. The next day, the Institute would host the summit, a day of high-profile speeches and presentations. But that wasn't what worried them. What worried them was Arlen, and the fact that his plan to steal everything from Vera had worked for so long. Now, it was time to turn the tables. With their plan set in motion, they both stood at the edge of the cliff again, looking out at the city below. The stakes were higher than ever, but there was no turning back. Vera, once broken by the betrayal, now stood tall beside Alexian, her resolve steeled. She wasn't just fighting for her research anymore. She was fighting for her future, and for the chance to prove that even when everything is taken away, you can still fight back. And together, they would make sure Arlen would never win. As the twin moons rose higher in the sky, casting long shadows, over the city they turned and made their way back to the outpost, ready to take on whatever came next. The next morning arrived too quickly. The air was thick with anticipation, a tension that neither Alexian nor Vera could shake. They had spent the night refining their plan, checking every angle, ensuring there were no weak points. Their mission was clear: break into the Nexian Institute, retrieve Vera's stolen research, and expose the corruption at the heart of the scientific community. They were racing against time, with only a few hours before the summit began, and the high-security systems of the Institute would be on full alert. As the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the city of Zerinthos below them seemed to come alive, its people unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. In the distance, the Grand Institute loomed, its sleek, high-tech exterior reflecting the early morning light. The thought of infiltrating such a fortress would have terrified most. But for Alexian and Vera, it was their only shot at justice. Alexian adjusted his tactical gear, his combat suit now replaced with the dark, sleek attire of a human security consultant, a perfect cover for their mission. The disguise would allow him to blend in with the staff, to move freely without raising suspicion. He glanced at Vera, who had traded her scientific lab attire for a black, form-fitting jumpsuit that offered both flexibility and stealth. She was every bit the part of a woman who had something to prove. They stood at the edge of the outpost, looking out toward the Institute, knowing that today would change everything. "It's now or never," Alexian said, his voice low but firm. "We've got one shot at this." Vera nodded, her violet eyes hard with resolve. "Let's make it count." The journey to the Institute was a quiet one. They moved swiftly through the winding streets of Zerinthos, avoiding checkpoints and the ever-watchful eyes of security cameras. Alexian used his human contractor identification to get them past the first line of defenses. The entrance security was lax when they saw his badge. Vera, with her knowledge of the Institute's layout, led the way through the hallways, with precision. As they approached the main entrance, Alexian paused, scanning the area. The security was heavier here, with guards stationed in pairs near the entrance. He could see the surveillance cameras turning, observing every movement. They couldn't afford to make a mistake now. "On my lead," Alexian whispered. Vera's sharp eyes darted to the security system's control panel just above them. It was a small, concealed unit, barely noticeable to the average person, but obvious to someone who knew what to look for. She'd designed these systems herself, and in that moment it was both her strength and her curse. With a few rapid movements, Vera approached the panel and began tapping in the override codes. Within seconds, the security feed flickered, and the guard's attention shifted, just long enough for Alexian to slip past them unnoticed. The next few moments were a blur of adrenaline as Alexian led Vera into the building. They were in. The Institute was eerily quiet as they moved deeper. Inside, they passed by corridors lined with closed doors, each one holding more secrets than the last. Finally, they reached the secured section of the building. Vera stopped in front of a large metal door, the kind that only high-ranking officials had access to. It was where Arlen's office lay, where the vault containing her research waited to be opened. "This is it," Vera said, her breath shallow. "This is where he's keeping everything." Alexian's voice was steady as he scanned the area. "We have a few minutes before they realize something's wrong. What's our next move?" Vera walked up to the terminal beside the door. "I need to bypass the security system. It'll take a few moments, just keep an eye out." As she worked, Alexian kept watch. He could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment hanging over them. This wasn't just about retrieving stolen data. This was about taking back what was hers, about righting the wrongs that had been done. Every beep of the terminal as Vera worked felt like an eternity. But finally the door clicked open, its heavy metal frame sliding back with a hiss. Vera stepped inside first, Alexian close behind. They had made it. Inside the vault was a small but highly secure server room. The walls were lined with high-tech equipment, each piece designed to protect the data that held Vera's research. She moved quickly, her fingers flying over the control panel as she accessed the mainframe. "They won't know what hit them," Vera muttered under her breath, a determined edge to her voice. Suddenly an alarm blared, a loud, shrill sound that echoed through the corridors. Alexian cursed under his breath, grabbing Vera's arm. "We need to move now." Vera didn't hesitate. She quickly downloaded the files, her face grim with concentration. The data was too important to risk losing. As the files transferred, Alexian's mind raced. The security systems were locking down the building, and soon, the entire institute would be in lockdown. "We're almost there," Vera said, her voice tight. "Just give me a few more seconds." Alexian's mind was already working on the next phase of their escape. He had planned for this moment. As soon as Vera had the data, they would have a clear path out. They would make it. They had to. Brink. Countdown on the data transfer reached its final seconds, and just as the alarm systems began to change tone, signaling an impending lockdown, the final file downloaded. "Done," Vera breathed, a mix of relief and exhilaration in her voice. "Let's go," Alexian said, pulling her towards the exit. They moved through the halls quickly, avoiding the security cameras and the guards who were now on high alert. As they neared the building's exit, they could hear the sound of boots marching through the halls. Backup had arrived. "We're not going through the front," Alexian said, grabbing her hand. "Follow me." He led her to a maintenance corridor that Alexian had studied earlier. It wasn't the fastest way out, but it was the safest. As they moved through the tight hallway, Vera's heart raced, her thoughts flickering between the success of their mission and the danger they were still in. Suddenly they came to a stop as they heard footsteps behind them. A group of security officers rounded the corner, their eyes widening as they spotted the two of them. "Freeze!" one of them shouted, reaching for his weapon. Without thinking, Alexian pulled Vera behind him, shielding her from view. In one smooth motion, he activated a device he had planted earlier, creating a massive diversion in the building's security system. The lights flickered, and the guards' communications were disrupted. In that moment of confusion, Alexian pulled out his sidearm and fired a non-lethal round, knocking the first guard off his feet. "Go now," Alexian shouted to Vera. They sprinted through the corridor, and Alexian, with his military training, led them swiftly out of the building. As they emerged into the alley behind the institute, Vera could see the gleaming city of Zerinthos stretching out before them. They were free. For the first time in a long time, Vera allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future, one where her research would be used for the good of the galaxy, and one where justice had been served. "We did it," she whispered, her voice full of wonder. Alexian, his breath coming in heavy gasps, smiled back at her. "We did, and this is just the beginning." As they disappeared into the shadows, their mission a success, they both knew that they had not only stolen back what was rightfully hers, but had also created a bond that would last a lifetime.